very great pleasure to introduce Saul Kripke, the man of the hour, who is going to be talking to us on first person.
There's a lot that comes out of it. I believe Sydney, for many years, gave a similarly titled presidential address that I have only skimmed, because one of the important issues in the Fluffy mind, of course, is how much to emphasize the first person point of view of one's mental states and other states. That happens to be my own emphasis in necessity, as opposed to that of the external observer. I'm not going to talk a lot about that, so I may take that a little bit. I am concentrating here on the perplexity some philosophers have had on the simple first person pronoun I. Perhaps I shouldn't have invited it, or have invited a token linguist, since I am not very familiar with any corresponding linguistic literature on the issue. Okay, and probably not familiar with some relative philosophical literature either. So that just is something that I haven't had to keep up with. The genesis of this was, in fact, that I was fairly recently invited to give a talk on my views on David Kaplan's most recent materials, as well as the older stuff in demonstrative, but also new stuff, which I take it he does permit to be quoted. So it says on all copies, not for quotation, but this talk for this, these people abroad want me to talk about it. And the unfortunate thing, especially given this very nice presentation, which I appreciated very much, except that I think that my anecdotes are almost always true. I just wanted to talk about some of the perplexities that philosophers have gotten into this. Now, I labor under another handicap that you can already hear. I have a bad case of bronchitis. It is possible that if I were just a speaker at some other conference, I would have said I can't come and sick. And I have been mostly you hear it in my voice already, but I sometimes break into making a coughing fit, and if that happens, please forgive me. Maybe I can do it in strategic minutes. Okay. Now, in his newest material, I have the brief version, draft number 1. I talked to David sometime this week, and he said he doesn't know which draft I have, and I kind of say so. I assume that basic positions are not being changed. So I want to start out with some sort of applause. One must, David argues, of course the term meanings its use is loosely derived from Wittgenstein. It probably has little other relation to what Wittgenstein is doing. think of the task of linguist or of the semanticist. As, for example, Klein does in some of his writings as primarily that of translating into one's own language. For one thing, of course, that presupposes the semantics in one's own language and gets very little, but as a description from above, right, of the uses in the community. And it has to be done in a detached way, matching what Corey and Russell and some philosophers have called scientific language. Language itself will contain neither indexicals nor tense, but be generally stated. And of course, it may contain some other references to which possible world rather than to the actual world, right? So on. But it must be done coolly. For example, as Kaplan says, one must be able to describe words expressing anger without getting anger. Saying, hi, right? This has reference to, this is really relevant to what other writers have written on another subject. I wrote a user paper which never appeared, though actually someone did recommend it. It's something working. As opposed, at one extreme, the type of view of, say, Peter Hempel, that takes his historical writing to be little different in principle from writing in physics, let's say, involving laws and reputation and so on, right? The other extreme says that history employs a particular method of understanding, which I think certainly has something to it, and trying to think the way the characters themselves think. But in its strong formulation, I think this was a compelling with looked up on a paper, which is really buried in some files to which I don't have access. I think it's around. It said that, for example, if you write about any historical character, you should try literally to become that character. I don't mean, I suppose, getting into all the psychological state of the character, and I remarked, without any anticipation there, well, if you write about Hitler, don't try to become Hitler. This would be a very dangerous idea. As some of you have probably heard of the writer David Irving, he originally started with very respectable publishers, probably not into it. He has at any rate something of fulfillment this year. So, that much is true, right? Now, in both demonstratives and this later paper, Kaplan's data versus the indexical I, what does it mean? Initial answer might be the first-person program. This is a kind of functional description. What does the first-person pronoun mean? I say, I would invite to speak out that one. The naturally emphasizes where one disagrees. If one understands the whole thing. And I disagreed with them about two things. One was this material that we're going to talk about. But so it's not just divided in this way. The other one was about what he says about the difference between and and but. And what presuppositional or conversational connectives. I'm not going to say anything about that here. Okay. Now, dictionary well. So he gives an example. For example, Webster's third provides the one who is speaking and writing, and they both decide, I shall not want, in order to drive the point home. This wealthy man sitting in the back of the auditorium in a lottery award ceremony, in whispering to Solomon, which of the people here won the $10 million, and he whispers back, the one who is speaking, or equivalently, from Kripke's third, I did, I shall not want. 2 or 3 comments here. Two or three comments here, but one is the psalmist did not ever say, I shall not want, since he did not, contrary to what most Americans intellectuals seem to think, writes in 1611, and I have to see in your times, I believe, if my memory is correct, I'm not from the cemetery. Something like the Bible said, or the Old Testament says, as opposed to the more recent Bible, right? This was in your time, but I think Christian fundamentalists, I remember hearing that, I don't know if you remember this, I really do that. Until, or rather, till, as Scripture says, so many people say, now, the psalmist, in fact, didn't use the word I at all. As in many languages, I might be used only for emphasis, and is, in various senses, simply a prefix or a suffix to the verb. And that is the case in the Hebrew word text, which the psalmist must have at least consulted. I talked about it. Yeah, okay. Now, so far this even supports Kaplan, because his point is, you should not look about the meaning of I. Sometimes we would believe in the word I was not here, and it's usually random kind of, at least, it's here. See, so, so far this leader supports Kaplan, because Kaplan's basing on what is this. The search as in Frege for what the word I means, or the sense of I, is obviously a mistake, because it is wholly given by the scientifically, that is neutrally expressed, right? When someone says I, touch, when anyone says I, when anyone else says I, point. What he says is true, or true of the possible world in which he's living at the time, if that's relevant. If and only if. Yes, but, that's a purely general statement, and it totally determines the semantics of this would only be strengthened if one recognized the existence of languages in which it was only a prefix. Or something, when I talked to David about this, he said, well, something that he would have been familiar with the example of Latin for this. And I talked about this in middle of something like that. Okay, now, Now, Kaplan is rather strongly influenced here. And also, this is, of course, an example of Kaplan's thought. Distinction between character and content, and the character is a general rule for the use of I. The content, in each particular case, might be Well, it depends on zero content. Say if one took the singular proposition here and the singular proposition about the speaker, right? But, or a writer, or as Kaplan emphasizes, doesn't have to be a speaker. He emphasizes also it could just as well be a writer or a thinker. When he quotes Webster's, he emphasizes something, it could just be something, thinking. You've seen the word out. And we will return to this. So, now, Kaplan compares, and he's thrown out the influence of paper by John Perry. Kaplan compares and contrasts to that phrase. And part of this graph of longer, it graph varies longer things, but I have never also some lectures on Frege, not only on lexicals, but also on the supposed hierarchy of indirect senses and so on, and also even direct quotation, which is emphasized by Kaplan and also Corey Washington, in perhaps other writers. But not too many people talk about the regular direct quotation. It is illuminating actually to compare. And it's a reductive discussion, I'll say something about this. But I not only want to talk about what is true according to Frege, but is true according to the truth, or that is to something that is co-extensive on the senses. But now I should also mention that Kaplan conversation, the emphasis, this idea of scientific language is obviously not satisfied by scientists in the lab who use tenses in the next time. It's not satisfied in scientific nor would a paper be rejected as failing to use scientific language because it violated the strictures, especially tense. It is, as I've talked about, very hard, I think, to find genuine examples of tenseless sentences about ordinary objects, not maybe about mathematics or something, right, in natural language. It is a fiction, I think, by some philosophers, such as suggest in natural language, and I've seen examples given in the whole thing, but also what they call scientific language, that is language spoken by no one no time. Well, that's right, spoken by no one no time. Secret. And anyway, it is their own invention. Now, David recognizes this, but nevertheless relies on this in his accounts here, that everything can be done in scientific language in this sense. Okay, and perhaps in some sense this is important. Now, he thinks Kripke was right to say the following. If someone wants to use the same, to say the same today as he expressed yesterday, using the word today, he must replace the word, this word with yesterday. Although the thought is the same, its verbal expression must be different. So the sense, which would otherwise be affected by the differing kinds of utterance, is readjusted. So, Frege says, A, it was commented by Kaplan, that when someone says, today, I am feeling hungry, exactly the same thought is expressed as yesterday I was feeling hungry. The next day, right? And I guess guest yes. And they also have in here, and I think, 4 guest meetings or 2 days ago. Yes. So, if he says 2 days later, 4 guests clearing, the thought is still not changed by generalization. In fact, one could imagine, but this shows to me, look, this view taken as commandments. Suppose I had a phrase for 323 days ago. The thought still is not changed. Right? Wouldn't I just miscalculation here? Say right? But that is what is created. A certain river is supposed to be where the trade, right? And Kripke was right. This one. Now, after comments, Kripke wants supplement these comments with the observation that the lexicals and devices of direct reference, the whole theory of the lexicals would have been hit. Of course, he didn't know about the difference, right? But his theory of meaning provided the obvious point, and in fact, the very argument I'm giving, the thought must be there as a cognitive attitude, right? Was one thing that led Kripke astray. Now, there are other statements usually called tortured by Kaplan of Kripke about the first person. This is an example of what is bad about Kripke. So Kaplan says, reinterpreted in the light of his own theory, maybe Kripke could be talking just about the direct or by the sense of the generalization. But he plainly isn't. And mostly Kaplan condemns the passage. Now everybody presents himself in a particular primitive way, which he's presented to no one else. So when Buck allowed the usage in his late paper, thoughts, if they moved it, he'll probably take as a basis the primitive way in which he presented himself. Only Buck allowed himself to grasp what's the primitive way. Not only might communicate with others. He cannot communicate thought which he alone can grasp. Therefore, he has an eye of the wounded. He misused the eye in the sense that to be grasped by others, perhaps in the sense that he was speaking to his moments, by doing which he makes the associated conditions whose utterance serve for the expression of the thought. Now, the last sentence in Kripke is indeed extremely implausible, right? He means different things on I, right? He usually means the special sense of I, right? But when he wants to talk to someone else, he changes it to mean the man who is speaking to at this moment. But I'm sure if there were such a person, he would not have been aware of that. Right? And then, sorry, I can't tell it to him the same way I think it to himself. Right? But he could at least roughly think something like this, even with Kripke. I said, I am going to try to feel terrible. Well, he cannot grasp it in a sense. But he too grasps his term I. In that sense, the other term. And so he thinks, since it's Halpin speaking, who can he be speaking about but himself, right? So, therefore, he must be wounded or feeling terrible or whatever Halpin is trying to communicate. I'm also saying feeling terrible to make it something more internal, right? Okay. It might be communicated. Now, the passage was much attacked by both from Perry and by Kaplan, and defended by Garrett evidence in a paper on breakup amounts for this. Both Perry and Kaplan, very strong influence on Kaplan, say, look, Kripke seems to be saying that each person has a unique Kripkean sense for I, which differentiates itself from it. people that are so similar that any Freudian sense can not differentiate them. Now, I found this criticism, as it was, neither parent nor Catholic. And I think Kevin, as I understand it, had only minimal chance to read understood it in this way. Two, this wasn't what Frege was at all. It was the familiar Cartesian view that I am aware of myself in a very special first-person way. However, an objection to this could immediately arise. I mean, two objections. The second objection, which is Kaplan first says that he sincerely, following period, that he sincerely doubts that there is any unique such way. Even as Casper was sufficiently narcissistic to something of self-confidence introduced by his twin colleagues who felt it like quality political chapters with his associated the same self-confidence concept of his everyday use of argument. Well, yes. In some sense. Now, but what sense is this? We tried to do this. So, the sense will be vague or confusing, just in these Cartesian terms. The subject, the thinker, the raised cogent thoughts. Because Kaplan rightly emphasizes that actually speaking and writing are not necessary for the use of the word up. Okay, the first thing the dumb in speech and unable to write. Now, I can still use the word. Now, so what possible sense there could be that we would easily pick him out? Now, the Cartesian sense would be the subject, but that doesn't pick anyone out. On the contrary, right here, Descartes would be letting everyone is the subject for himself. Right? On the other hand, if one says, oh, that, I is the subject, that, of course, would go in an object third column. So, it is thought he must mean everyone has some unique psychological quality differentiated from everyone else, but that is extremely implausible. Now, what mistake is being made here? Actually, maybe no mistake is being made. I think or, by the way, Kaplan, it's not completely right. If I write a paper, especially, I can say, the present writer thinks there's a mistake. Now, the present writer is not synonymous with I, but it is sometimes. Just perhaps to be a little more impersonal or something. The present speaker, a little bit less, but maybe on some location like this, maybe so. The psalmist is found in the lettering somehow. And Elizabethan in 17th century probably better. The more ancient, for instance, is less plausible for using something other than I. What is the mistake here? It is because it is assumed that Frege thinks that Dr. Loudon is speaking. Now look, this mistake is not only made by, so to speak, Kaplan and Perry. It is also made in some way by some philosophers like David, who says, I can't think exactly who they are, who think there can be only one genuine subject. Perhaps it is only for products, like that. At least that's one reason. Because As this term, the subject, you can't contain I. And so you just want to pick only one thing out, so pick only one thing out. Okay, there isn't any other. All these other people maybe are just dominant, or don't have one, or something, or not a metaphysical subject. I myself think that this is digression also, I don't know if I can. I wouldn't all take wrong except that I do not, it also, some people here might even be targets of the bigger. But, look, people argue that there has to be other minds. Look, everyone behaves so similarly to me, and if I have to mind, they must do. Now, some people say you shouldn't generalize in one case, but perhaps they form a theoretically natural mind, and something like that the chances are they're the same. But what is really the trouble is this. There is a lot of proof that many are not sinners at the same time, because various philosophers state who seem, or that's cold philosophers anyway, state theories that would seem to me to imply they have no inner states, or if they do verbally say that they have inner states, they give analyses which I know perfectly well are not true of genuine inner states. So, what explanation can they be? Because they seem otherwise justified for sincerity and for honesty and for intelligence. They're obviously, just as they themselves say, in some way, very cleverly programmed robots, similar to a genuine human subject, such as myself. But there are many more of them than there are of me. So, when I look at a random person who is not even a philosopher, the chances are much greater that that person is one of these cleverly programmed robots, since from the only sample I have, there are much more of them. Moreover, the robots are right in saying that most of these human-like people are like that. Only I must be one of the very exceptional people who have genuine inner states in my own sense. Okay, now, however, we will not return to this argument. Okay, now, I mean, they would not have inner states, or if they admitted they give analyses that they would perfectly well know that the interact if they actually have those things. Okay, okay. Well, what is wrong with the argument that the subject must be unique, or else it would go in a circle and must then deny itself? Well, the people who argue this way are thinking of the language spoken by God, the so-called scientific language. Since Dr. Loudon is the one speaking the language, by the subject, he, of course, means himself. But and that is the answer. But perhaps it's not the whole answer, because he is speaking German, a common language in which I should mean the same thing for everyone. And isn't Kaplan right to say that the whole of the use of the word I can be captured in this neutral way by saying that a sentence with I, there may be some other indices involved, right, expresses a truth if and only if the rest is actually due to the subject of the sentence, whether it's the thinker, the speaker, or what. Well, seem quite conclusive, because doesn't this give a complete description of the matter? And what else could be needed? Now, the trouble with it is the following. The trouble with it is the following. Though this is all very well for some sort of descriptive anthropologist who may in fact have the concept of I, it would be very difficult to get it across to Frege or anyone else. So, for example, Kaplan says to Frege, so in particular, if you, Frege, either say or think using the word if, then what you think is true or say is true, so right? If and only if you, Frege, have that property. Well, then Frege is supposed to think, so how am I going to use the German word if on the basis of this general statement? I will attribute, say, feeling and pain to myself, if and only if Frege is in pain, Kaplan says. But who's that? Well, I'm Frege. So, if I am in pain, I should say that. But that supposes that Frege has the concept of himself already. Okay. My own view, therefore, is first, in terms of Frege's philosophy, Frege was inconsistent and incorrect in terms of his own views, what he said about today and yesterday. This would be made all the clearer if there were one German word for 323 days ago. Even Kaplan recognizes the mistake that he made about today and yesterday. On the other hand, Frege made no error in terms of his own philosophy, in terms of what he said about I. And this is important in Frege's philosophy. And yet another way, Tyler Burge has argued that people who think Franklin's in is the meaning must be wrong because then determine truth value and the meaning of a sentence containing either his lexical or tense. Say, I am happy today, right? Does not determine truth value, right? It has a fixed meaning, it has a Kaplanian character, right? But the truth values will be different from speaker to speaker and from to time. This, however, is not Frege's view. And I wanted to quote, but I thought I had it, and I'm not sure that I do. It occurs in both a brief passage in his early Foundation for Particular stuff in the white paper on thoughts. Such sentences do not express a complete thought. Frege explicitly says. And therefore, of course, only a complete thought determines the truth value. What's required to complete them is the time, and in the case of I, the speaker. But, Burge might go on, but look, how can they be part of the sentence? Well, they can be part of the sentence, all right. That is the real sentence, containing both the time and the speaker, as if it were a linguistic part. But how can the speaker use that? He must have a way of grasping what I is and what time is. And there it is now. Right? Okay. And this is the point of Kripke's supplementary passages. And I should also emphasize that both the Grundlagen and the late Kripke thoughts emphasize how close to the Cartesian point of view Kripke has. People think sometimes because he says that census must be grasped by, in principle, by everyone, everything must be in the public language. In fact, this was used as objection to this view about I here. But in fact, he says that my own sense impression of green is available to me and to no one else. Is available to me and to no one else. Indeed, as Evans directly argues, I think, though a Freudian Zen is not a content of mind, thus intrinsically inaccessible for that reason in mind, that does not mean that there can be no private senses some of the time as senses that can be grasped only by the subject. And in particular, my own internal states of scholarly impressions and other things like that, and for Frege, just as in the classical Cartesian, or so to speak, the anti-linguistic science view, graspable only by the thinker and the speaker himself, right? And people who have interpreted differently, such as some of the authors I'm talking about here, they're also Geek, who said he should have drawn the conclusion that there can't be any private languages and Wittgenstein and so on. No, he didn't. Okay, and he didn't. A.P. Carney pointed out a complicated example involving projective geometry. It occurs already in foundations of arithmetic as two people who can't notice, well, if you don't have to think the geometry, you won't get it. And he did, she did. So, at any rate, it would be a complicated switch than like a sector inversion and ledge switch and so on. Okay. Now, having said that, so in direct opposition to Kaplan, I think Frege was right in his own terms about the first person, wrong in his own terms, that they expect in what he said about today and yesterday. Now, what about according to me? According to me, the first person use of I, of course, does not have a Fregean sense. But it might be a paradigmatic case that I did not mention in naming necessity of fixing a reference by means of a description. And it's a rule of the common language that each of us fixes the reference by the distinct description, the subject. A long time ago in conversation, Harry Frankfurt suggested to me that perhaps an example of the contingent A for I might be the Cartesian cogito. At that time, I didn't take it very seriously and thought that even if it was such an example, well, I hadn't somehow classically been thought of that. It's certainly contingent because I might have known, right? A for it hasn't usually been called, but it has the flavor. It now seems to me indeed of my examples, and it doesn't have the trouble, for example, the meter stick example where I realized that I was tacitly assuming someone doing the reference fixing of the meter stick in front of him, but maybe this is all an illusion and there is no such stick, right? So in this problem, if the stick S exists, well, then there's no competition, but I estimate might perhaps, and there might be a problem. And the Neptune case, where maybe Neptune might have gone the way of Saul, my two examples. But Descartes' whole point is that I'm not going to be any doubt about this one. Okay, now, having said this, Descartes is ambiguous because he says, I am not in my body like a tablet in a vessel. And what he really concludes is that my essence is thinking. First, that's the only thing that I do that I cannot doubt. Perhaps he does not draw this conclusion that I do anything necessity, that maybe it's the only thing about me that is not strictly contingent. Perhaps state rights in the broadest metaphysical sense of the meaning of state rights. It certainly is true that I could lose my left hand and I could still remember. A figure by Tom Manuel, which someone who looked up for it was not on his bibliography, so perhaps he did not see light of that. I think it was actually read. And and to take a more materialist point of view, it proposed that maybe I might be identified with my brain. Now, you see, indeed, I could lose my left arm and I could remain. And perhaps the idea is I could lose everything but my brain, and I would remain. However, Roger Holbrook, this is the way I remember things, this is one of my anecdotes, but it was read at the exact, so I think it's reasonably public, if my anecdote was true. Roger Holbrook replied, oh, I guess I lost a lot of weight. I didn't weigh nearly as much as I thought I had. I'll have to weigh brain instead, right? And that's the news. Now, this conclusion need not be drawn by Descartes or anyone else. One might believe that I would remain even if various parts of me, such as my left hand, were stripped away. I might believe I could doubt the real existence of my left hand. It might be only a contingent fact that I have it. But that does not mean the left hand is not, in fact, a part of me. So, the common sense view, and the one that's no arguments should lead us to oppose, I think, not Kripke's book, I think it's that when Loudon or anyone else says, I, he, means to refer to the person himself, including all the bodily parts, as genuine parts of himself. Right? Yet, he could also think that the other parts are subject to Cartesian doubts, that they're only perceived by me as subjects, and so on. Right? But what he not have, from this point of view alone, any special view about I itself. Now, here's the right reference. Now, Terence Evans tried to defend Kripke against these descriptions, and John Perry gave a very complicated which I had trouble finding out. So, I cannot really deal with it properly. But, the problems with Kripke could be this. When someone else says, and this was the reflexive use of Jefferson podcast in the philosophical literature in period. I mean, the other is right. If someone says, Dr. Loudon thought that he himself was in pain, right? The speaker since he cannot possibly be reporting Dr. Loudon's belief because he cannot grasp him. Also, when he talks to him and says, you, right, and so on, the senses must be different. Now, this objection is correct as it's stated, but it only carries over to Frege the problem he already has everywhere in about proper names. In the famous footnote on Simpson reference about Aristotle, he says that one person might associate with the sense of Aristotle, something doesn't make sense to about it, I forget. Yeah. Okay, Google book, yeah. And another might associate statutory philosopher who was yeah, okay. So then they will associate different senses because Aristotle was born in Cairo. One will be taught logical, the other will not. This becomes, these variations of sense are tolerable. These variations of sense, as long as representing such variations of sense may be tolerated according to theoretical structure, the demonstrative science will not to occur in a perfect language. In the later different thoughts, which has, Alvin, who was just mentioned, Rudolf Lingen, and so on, they imagine even two people who know the third line under different descriptions and think maybe one of them calls him Dr. Loudon and the other, something else is first name, right? What? Gustav Loudon, right? It emphasizes they really speak different idioms. But an indirect discourse reports on what they're saying will be very hard. Because if I say so-and-so wrote that Aristotle was a great philosopher, I have to use Aristotle in my sense. I got to have some level of belief. And not in that person I'm talking about. And I may not even know what that sense was. So I cannot possibly report his thought. Right? Now, the same problem is basically what Zalperi is elaborating here in his reply to Evans and certainly Rowan for Frege. But it will not arise for this proposal that I'm tentatively making here because I can no requirement that the fixture of the reference neither stick or the name or of Neptune or Vulcan or anything else, right? Nor an I, right? Then communicate this way of fixing the reference to others, and on the contrary, the name will be passed from link to link without this necessarily being preserved. So, indeed, the Cartesian protocol could be a proper example of what I am talking about. Now, I do emphasize that the problem into which Cartesians have pushed themselves is not essential to this theory. Let me quote you, because I remember when I was very young, about 13, reading Descartes with great enthusiasm, thinking it sounded like a beautiful statement, and then some months later reading Hume. There are some philosophers who imagine we are very intuitively conscious of what we call ourselves. Self is exactly what. And we feel its existence and continuous in existence, we're certain beyond demonstration, both its perfect identity and simplicity. The strong sensation of violent passionately saying that attracting us to this view takes it more intently, and so on and so on. To attempt to further virtuous or to weaken its evidence, and so on. Okay, right? Now, unluckily, all these positive assertions are contrary to that very experience is completed for them, nor do we have any idea of self-acting advantage to explain. And he goes on to say that whenever he concentrates on what these people, I must confess, if anyone is serious on Budge's collection thinks he has a different notion of himself from Hume's, when Hume concentrates on what he calls himself, all he sees is some particular impression. Now, if anyone else thinks he has a different notion of himself, I must confess I can reason no longer with him. Just as I feel about these robot philosophers. All I can argue is that he may be in the right guy, but we're essentially different in this particular. That, of course, is the target. Okay. Now, I read this passage with enthusiasm and shock, and I could talk to other little kids. My friends did not get it. But, older, at about 25, I talked about it to a non-philosopher, a young woman whom I knew, and she said, well, he mustn't have ever looked in a mirror. Now, at that time, I probably thought this shows how uncomprehending non-philosophers is. But at the present time, I see the justice of the remark, since the idea that I am directly known to myself as a Cartesian subject need not imply that the reference is something other than what appears in the mirror. Of course, as I remarked at the other time I talked about this, there may have been a problem for Hume looking at himself in the mirror. I was warned that not too many people laughed and not. Why does everyone know why there was a bit of problem? Well, he was tremendously fast. And it was at least the mirror when the back to the finish. Tremendously wrong. Look at himself in the mirror. But still, the mirror has to have been wrong. My friend in question was in fact himself overweight. The worst problem for the 20th century woman in 1860. No, not as overweight as you. I was told later when I was no longer in contact with her that she had lost weight. But that weight loss is remembered. And that was not the work that did business state during the okay. Basically, I think she was right. There is nothing in this argument that implies that I referred to anyone but an entity that contains the whole of you as a part. I don't know why John Perry, in talking about this, wanted to emphasize someone who erroneously thought he was human, rather than a more standard example than like Napoleon or something, or Christ. I was did a recently with someone in fact philosophers and said, philosophers think they're Napoleon. And I said, Napoleon must have been the greatest philosopher of all time. Okay. He was great. Right? Okay. But strangely, and either of the influence of Castaneda's material on the special use of he himself, right, the setting language, or under other influences, there are those who have thought there was a problem, and that someone who follows Descartes cannot identify the self with Descartes. And this does not merely mean that I would remain even though my body were stripped away, which may be Descartes attempted to, but even that you can't say that it is a singular term referring to Descartes. Now, this is in direct opposition to Kaplan, and it is something where I want to endorse Kaplan, though I consider his view to be insufficient for the reasons that I gave. Now, one such case is Elizabeth Anscombe, and I wish I had the opportunity of talking about the matter to her. I am the direct target of her because I say, for example, that Descartes, Saul Kripke is right to say Descartes' argument for dualism being left essentially first person character, making an argument about the non-identity of Descartes with his own body. But it seems the argument of Descartes depends on applying the method of vowels. Now, I certainly don't think Descartes is identical to his body, and in the passage where I really talk about Descartes, I don't think it is anything such deep. I just think that, gosh, there was a terrible, there was a terrible accident in Descartes was hit by a truck. He survived. Well, there's his body there. It's perfectly intact. We better put it in a box. Now, I think he did not survive. And that is related to what Descartes is talking about. And it doesn't even require a distinguished orthogonal argument and so on. But this is exactly what Anscombe criticizes because I use Descartes rather than I say right. And Descartes' argument depended on skepticism. And her conclusion, well, the thing is a very difficult piece of writing. Even from the time I got to skim it. And when I talked to her, things always became clearer. But her, she seems to be, she distinguishes between I and EA, which is short for, obviously, Elizabeth Anscombe. There are parallel passages in the estimation where Wittgenstein says I is not the name of a person and distinguishes between I and LW. Okay, I think, though he is not cited or quoted, this is, I mean, he seems to have something to do with Wittgenstein. This is the principal influence on him. However, I do not attempt to give an exegesis of Wittgenstein either. I mean, he says I is not the name of a person. In one sense, that is, or now of a place. But in one sense, that is obvious because I is not the name at all. But maybe something deeper in there. In one place it says, look, surely when you say I, such and such, you wish to call attention to a particular person. This invitation is, I wish to call attention to myself. Okay. Now, Anscombe Anscombe's conclusion, however, is fairly easily stated. Well, she imagines various things like, I can be completely aware of myself, even though my body is anesthetized. But she first holds the theory of proper names, also held by Peter Geek, with whom she has been associated, and by Noam Chomsky, also with whom she's less associated, right? That a name for a human being is a name for a man, must have a body, member of an animal species, and so on, right? So, Descartes a priori calls that a mind norm. That is one example, right? I can be in complete connection with myself, but my body is the next time that I can be completely self-aware. Right? So she concludes that if I were regarded as a singular term, a referring expression, it could only refer to the dubious Cartesian ego that Hume is unaware of. See, look, the problem with the Humean Hume mentioned in my book, and let's assume the problem about Cartesian ego versus Hume is that Hume seems to think that there could be sensations, impressions, mental qualities with no bearer. And it's the bearer's existence is dubious. But I'm not mentioning this in my discussion of these matters. But that seems to me to be quite unintelligible. And that Hume must have gone wrong somewhere. Descartes may have gone wrong somewhere too. Okay, I mean, what would a floating sensation not belonging to anyone's being? Yet according to him, the supposed self is just a construct about a sequence of sensations and so on. Okay. Anyway, her conclusion is that if I were a singular term referring to something, it would vanish as much as its Cartesian ego. Therefore, it does not refer at all. It simply has the look of an expression that refers to an object and must be given some different analysis. Now, at least that's the way I understand her. If I was referring to the expression Descartes was right, and now troubles persist. Now, I never got to talk to Elizabeth about this, so I had many conversations with her. And maybe we didn't talk because this was a polemic against me or we hadn't seen each other. But I did hear for a third party that he asked her, well, if I was not refer her, then, for example, how could you refer from I am a philosopher who became Catholic to some philosopher who became Catholic from a normal thing? She said, I don't know. This was only reported to me in my house, so it's correct. She said, I don't know. And she doesn't know why it involves the behavior of such a singular term for expression, but it's not. Now, what might think Anscombe is a very special philosopher, too. She belongs to a very special school. She would be in great contrast with many of the stereotypically scientific types who prevail today. Who could be more different from Anscombe than that? David Burns. Now, but worried about the problem of belief, they say. He wrote a paper on it, and he is worried about the very same Castor and Pollux problem. First, for him, worlds are only qualitative. There's a lot of David Lewis type possible world semantics in there, in his version. But his basic conclusion is, even if one is so-called exegesis, a possible world could contain two twins and one could know exactly who did it, Castor and Pollux, and still ask, is either of them on? And it would make sense. Therefore, he concludes, one must take as primitive. For him, a proposition is a set of possible worlds. However, our propositional attitudes are not attitudes towards propositions, because they might contain to say, I believe that I grew up in David Lewis believes that he grew up in Oberlin. He says, I believe that I grew up in Oberlin. This expresses an attitude of David Lewis towards a property that is a property. It expresses the attitude is that of self-description of having grown up in Oberlin. Okay, now, he has a similar attitude towards now, or today, as one might express, right? For some, this might make it then a binary relation between, an attitude between a binary relation between a self, a time, and a property, as self-described as being in presence, such and such, right? For Lewis, there's only one entity of the stage, but that's another part of his philosophy. He temporarily first in the stage. I am not particularly fond of this stuff, but it's, can be left out here. Okay, now, Roderick Chisholm wrote a whole book, which I must say I'm not familiar with detail, but I think it has essentially the same view as Lewis. It essentially has the same view as Lewis. Only it is probably without, I should say probably, just saying without the baggage of the propositions being possible worlds, let alone the mysterious Lewis-type worlds, which are, imaginary, spatio-temporal, or real, according to Lewis. But basically they're the same. But I don't know, perhaps someone else can tell me. Has the comments been made that they hold a very similar view to that of Anscombe? I'm really asking you. Because, look, for them too, you have the same problem. Lewis self-described having grown up in Oberlin. Lewis self-describes being a philosopher. Lewis concludes, some philosopher grew up in Oberlin? Why? Why? Because the apparent singular term has disappeared. And the same thing applies to Chisholm as well. Okay. Better to conclude, I think that Kaplan is right about this. that I is a term used to designate myself. And even if it doesn't occur explicitly in language, it is only a verbal inflection. It occurs implicitly to do this. Otherwise, the logical inferences that are supposedly supported would be impossible to achieve by any representation. Now, I know that Anscombe, well, at least I heard that a third party talked to Anscombe and asked her about this. Okay? And she admitted this was a problem. I myself was a naval officer. And said she did not know the explanation. However, I surprised Saul, as far as I know, for all I know, right, or for all I self-ascribe knowledge. Sorry. Lewis doesn't deal with this. I have not skimmed through Chisholm, has not gotten a chance, and did not have a copy for these lectures. Anyone know if he deals with this? Serious question. But I don't think they do. At least Anscombe did worry about questions which he had no answer to it. See, and of course, the identity statements, I am David Lewis, and so on, and making substitutions will also present the problem on the self-description here. There is yet another problem, perhaps, peculiar to David Lewis. David Lewis believes in the paper on self-actuality, what he calls the indexable theory of actuality. I don't like the term, but I believe what he says is that, and using what Peacock, as I believe proposed to be a better term than him, and I think I agree with him, actually, use it, every world is actual with respect to itself. In fact, I think you see the difference between me and Lewis is that to me the analysis almost goes the other way. To say that something is true with respect to an actual world is to say that had that world attained, he would have been the case. That's what it means to say that he holds with respect to alpha. David Lewis probably views it the other way around. But nevertheless, the degree extension line that each world is actual with respect to itself. But in his paper on some actuality, he says, so how can it be a virtue of God that he be actual? And indeed, our perfection. And indeed, that's true. But where does the illusion that there's something special about being actual come from? Well, the actual world is the only one I encounter. Look, the fallacy might be similar. I know very little about evolutionary biology, but much less about intelligent design. But I can say, this is probably not the main objection, but I can say the following. Let it be as improbable as one likes that I would have evolved, that this world would have evolved with all these people in it. Let it just be a billion to one. We don't know how many planets there are. Perhaps this came by a completely random process, right? You know, if you shuffle large enough, that's the large, you'll get one of them that will come out perfect at the end or whatever. But why are we so lucky to be on a planet that came out that way? Well, because the planets don't have any people on it, don't have any people marveling that they're lucky. I should mention this. I did not put this to the guy, because I didn't know he was going to talk to the design group. I happen to be acquainted with a PhD probably, who is one of the leaders of the movement. Whether you don't think it's about biology, but it's the simple probability argument seems to be rather bad. Perhaps a better argument of this type could be based on the so-called entropic principle literature on the entire cosmos that I won't discuss. Okay, now, well, look, for David, the illusion that we are so lucky as to be in the actual world, the illusion that we are so lucky as to be in the actual world comes from this. Why do the actual world is the one I inhabit? Well, but that's too much emphasis on the I. The actual world is the one that is self-described as inhabiting. And how do we parse a sentence about the actual world with that image? There seems to me, perhaps, to be a bit of tension here between these two parts of his philosophy. But I will emphasize even more what he might hold in common with other people that these logical inferences hold. This condition is difficult to satisfy by Chisholm's theory and Lewis's theory. They are really the same in this respect as instant theory. Perhaps what I should stop it here.
It's okay.
It's okay.
We can have some discussion.
Yes, okay.
We should probably try, I think, to get through the question in 20 minutes.
Yeah, I was puzzled by your example about why are we so lucky as to be on the only planet with people on it, and then you say, well, it has to be
a few planets.
Right. So I wanted to ask you, I want to present a scenario and ask you about it.
Yeah.
So suppose we're looking through the eyes of the Martian rover, right? And we look through the eyes of the Martian rover, and of course what we see is a barren landscape, nothing on it, no people, etc., etc., etc. Right? We're seeing through the eyes of the camera. Now, suppose there happened to be a mirror there, and the camera would come up against the mirror, then of course we would see a camera reflected and say, there are no people there, but at least there's a camera. But seeing the camera seemed to be a kind of a contingent thing, that it could very well be that we see a mirror on the Martian landscape and nothing at all reflected. Right?
Yeah.
It seemed to me that could be imagined, and wouldn't that be a situation?
Wait, well, what's the effect? Look, it is a contingent fact that there are any people on this planet. In fact, very improbable. What would do is question. Assuming that it is, in fact, improbable. Look, at least some philosophers, I think, answer herself. I think this type of intelligence is not an argument is adequate. Really, the replies to this should come from evolutionary biology. But I happen to know a probabilist who believes in this. And just as probability arguments, it seems inadequate without some estimates. I mean, assuming that the whole thing were completely random, if we don't know how many planets there are, right? So it's improbable that any given climate should have people on it.
Yes.
It's not surprising at all that maybe that some planet should have people on it, and also that they should feel very lucky indeed that there are planets which is so well structured in size. So this came out perfectly at random, right? But that's because they're unaware of all these other varying planets. Now, without knowledge of which are the varying planets, the argument seems to me to be fall down already there. Now, I happen to be acquainted, I didn't know this about him, with the PhD problem was who attended the fellowship seminar of mine in mathematics. And you were there, right? And you also could not tell, right? Had I known this about him, that he's in fact one of the leaders of the movements, I might have asked him. I think among philosophers, Anscombe and Geek, and also the interlocutor who asked Anscombe why he was result, or all that written in favor of something like 2009 years, at least teaching something like that. And Anscombe converted to me in words. Right? But one really ought to know a lot more about evolutionary biology to know about these issues going on. But really, it's probabilistic argument that seems to be failed. Right? Okay. Yeah. Yes. If we knew there are very few planets to try out, it might be okay. Yeah. That works. Yeah.
Hearing your references to Descartes, I was reminded of the classic dilemmas that attend Cartesian dualism, mind-body dualism.
Yes.
Namely, how does the interaction between the mental world and the physical world come about?
No, that is not the problem. For someone who's sympathetic to Cartesian dualism, namely me, right? This is indeed somewhat a serious problem. And it makes things a bit confusing and wide open. However, first, little of my argument today, I think, depends on real Cartesian dualism. If someone believes in something different, one could still think, or he could still think, that Descartes was right about this, but the analysis of the situation should not be given dualistically. Well, not right about maybe there being a vanish in himself, no material parts, right? But about the rest of everything, I said everything was maybe a catron, and so on. So I don't think my case rests on this. I am someone who thinks Descartes was better than his critics in this area. I do think the critics have raised a serious problem, and they have solved it, in my opinion, by brushing it away with solutions that are plainly inadequate and do not get rid of the problem such as it may exist. Of course, many of those advocates may disagree. My remark about the reply to the argument in favor of the existence of underlying expressed my feelings about some of the prevailing alternative views. I think one has a strong reply to John Stuart Mill here that it may appear as all those who were structured by me have a mind like I do. Many of these robots seem neither dishonest nor unintelligent as one applied the normal criteria to them. Yet, they spew forward theories which, if only they had minds on them, as I do, they could never have said. Now, of course, they could be lying. Who do they think they would fool? They would realize that no one else would be fooled. Say by. So, the most likely conclusion is that they are mere mechanisms Nor they themselves say so. So Bill was wrong in his argument. The overwhelmingly empirical evidence is that only a small minority of humans like creatures for mind. Okay, but I don't solve your problem. Okay, yeah. Nor do I think what I say here rests on such a necessity of such a or even opposing views of those like that. Right? Yeah.
Yes, amazing.
Okay, so I noticed a theme from this lecture that is common with your response to Scott's paper, namely what you said about Hesperus and phosphorus having some sort of meaning that, that Cicero and Tully don't have.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And perhaps I should have mentioned that. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, so you think the same thing about I.
That's right.
Yeah. But this is really semantics, not just a matter of.
Yeah.
So.
And probably it might be right that an I statement expresses a singular proposition. It certainly expresses a proposition about a person. There is more to semantics in translation than that. And it seems to be all the more obvious with I. There, the people, the Castanedas and so on, were right.
Yeah. So Kaplan can accommodate that much with his distinction between character and context. He's saying that the sentence, Saul Kripke, for instance, I am the philosopher, in my view, differ in meaning than in character.
Right.
So he can accommodate.
Yes, yeah. I guess that does not, as far as Kaplan goes, that reply might be sufficient. Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm here. I have a question. You said you felt Frege was wrong about yesterday and today, but basically in terms of you thought it was inconsistent on that.
Yes.
Do you think your own view that?
Well, look, yesterday might be a term whose reference is fixed by the day before, right? Might be. Now, what's plausible to me is that we would have a genuine look. There are two things you see. People talk about the Kaplan bad operator. Imagine rigidifying any expression, so to speak. Now, I doubt that in natural language there is such an operator, but there would be something like that, which I think sometimes Kaplan thinks he means himself, but sometimes he writes an operator. You could say that thing is, in parentheses, 27 days to 10. That is a demonstrative reference is fixed in the way you say, and that's a temporary usage rather than an operator, right? So that could be anything, it's predicate days or whatever, right? Somehow for genuine names or fixed terms in language, I'm inclined to believe that the criteria may be stricter, right? And that a name like, let me use it that way, because these are not names, literally, right? Term, maybe 323 days ago, is unlikely. No, that day, 3 days ago, never was. That's something, right?
You could say, consider 323 days ago.
And
I was feeling hungry then.
Yeah.
And the word then could be different words that
Yes.
they,
Yes. However, you see, that can be accounted for in ways. It could be that it's even a variable, like a Russellian analysis might say, it's the day, I was talking about this, you can't say that the day that equals that. Right. And the whole thing has a long existential qualification. There are various possible analyses. Or indeed, it could be a demonstrative use of that, but it's a special thing, a special temporary thing. We're talking about things that are true to the left.
Yes, tell us more about this semantic values. I say I'm
thing is not some elaborate Freudian sense that I take to apply to myself.
Right.
Because I might be wrong.
Right. Now, wait a minute.